What comes to your mind when you hear the word Cookie Run? Did you think of Kingdom? Or Oven Break? Or maybe even Witch's Castle? These are all great games in their own right, but there's one game that I believe gets left out the most. That game being Cookie Run: The Darkest Night. I've been in the Cookie Run space for almost a year now, and what better way to spend my time than to fall down a rabbit hole because of one particular character. I don't think it's been directly obvious in the Cookie Run content I've made, but my all-time favorite Cookie Run character is Ginger Brave. Sue me. When I hyperfixate, I tend to dig around to find as much content as I possibly can about a specific thing, whether that be a character or the story or whatnot. Naturally, this method can lead to a lot of discovery, which is where this video comes in. I've been wanting to make a video essay for an extremely long time, but I've always had a lot of trouble finding a topic worth talking about. I had originally planned to talk about Frostlands since that's what I'm most known for, but I decided to save that until after episode 1 premieres. I don't remember exactly how I found out about The Darkest Night, but apparently I found a walkthrough for it sometime in April 2025. The story is a really interesting take on the Cookie Run genre, and I'm a bit surprised it hasn't been talked about more outside of a handful of walkthrough videos around the game's release in November of 2023. According to a promotional poster prior to the game's release, it was made by Dev Sisters, Studio Fresh Dough, and MetaQuest. Fresh Dough's official YouTube channel states that they're a studio made by Dev Sisters. However, this channel has been dead for almost 2 years, with the most recent upload showcasing a new roguelike battle game mode update. Obviously, the game had announcement trailers which garnered over 35,000 views across the MetaQuest and Fresh Dough YouTube channels. The IMDb page for the game is relatively empty outside from general info, voice actors, and an overall rating. Same goes for the Cookie Run fandom wiki, which has been archived because of, quote, the information is either discontinued or is about a terminated game. The info on the fandom wiki was also never finished before it was archived, so the only things on there are the game's description, characters, summary, an unfinished intro to Chapter 1, and a couple extras. Side note, I'm aware that the people behind the Cookie Run fandom wiki have left to create their own Cookie Run wiki from scratch that will include all the games, ongoing or otherwise. The pinned comment on the video I found talking about this change says that The Darkest Night is a discontinued game, which probably explains why there was never anything past Chapter 1, and the fact it was removed from the MetaQuest store in March of 2025 for seemingly no reason. At the time I'm writing this, that new Cookie Run wiki is currently unavailable to my knowledge, as the comment also states it's only available to the people who are helping to make it at the moment. The game starts off with this spirit thing named the Will of the Cookies addressing Ginger Brave directly. It's worth noting that unlike the other Cookie Run games, Darkest Night only allows you to play as Ginger Brave. Another character appears behind Will of the Cookies, this guy named the Darkest Lord Cookie, and from there, the two take turns explaining the opening lore of the story. Does any of this come up later? Not really, but I'll do my best to break it down for you. The main gist is the Will of the Cookies is explaining in very vague terms the so-called impossible task only Ginger Brave can complete, while the Darkest Lord Cookie says something about being destined to be destroyed by Ginger Brave, but has made a vow to kill him every time he comes back. Anyways, Ginger Brave wakes up to find himself in an oven! Around him are some very burnt and definitely not sentient cookies, yada yada, you know the drill. He makes it to the top of the oven and finds the oven door slightly open. Until the Darkest Lord Cookie swoops in to shut it on him. There's a brief moment of helplessness before Wizard Cookie opens a fan door on the other side of the oven to help Ginger Brave escape. I don't think Wizard Cookie needs an introduction, we all know who he is. I guess everyone here has problems with explaining situations in a thorough and informational fashion because Wizard Cookie also talks in vague terms, but at least he promises to explain more later. Wizard Cookie ushers Ginger Brave to follow him so they can escape from the kitchen and, more importantly, from the Darkest Lord Cookie and his minions. So, they run off, grab some weapons, fend off some minions, drop more lore, and eventually, they're blocked off from continuing any further. There just so happens to be a Choco Drop in the terrarium directly next to them, but Wizard Cookie says it's too dangerous to jump in there to free it. As Wizard Cookie is pondering how to get past the statue thing blocking their path, Ginger Brave pulls a Quasi and jumps headfirst straight into the terrarium. That goes mostly without a hitch, and after a short boss battle, GB pops back out to be be greeted by a very angry Wizard Cookie. He scolds Gingerbrave for leaving, but somewhat calms down after realizing both he and the Choco Drop made it out fine. With the little chocolate's help, they're able to keep going, but uh-oh! The Darkest Lord Cookie comes out of nowhere to make threats and now they have to book it to escape. We're now at Gnome Square, which according to Wizard Cookie is a safe place far from the Darkest Lord Cookie. In game terms, that means this is your safe zone. They're then greeted by Prophet Cookie, who introduces himself and drops more vague lore hints to piece together what little scraps we have about this game's story. Since the game barely wants to tell the player about the lore, as I imagine they had plans to flesh out the full story later, I'll just bring you up to speed on what the hell is going on. Alright, so apparently, Gingerbrave is a cookie from some kind of prophecy. This prophecy basically states that he will be the one to lead all other cookies to freedom from the witch's castle. The Elder Gnome also gives Gingerbrave this book that belonged to another cookie from generations ago, and he states that the author was very similar to him for some reason. I guess this was meant to tie into the point made earlier when the Darkest Lord Cookie said that Gingerbrave keeps coming back every time after he's killed, and at this point, the Darkest Lord Cookie is just fed up with the whole situation. So is the impossible task the will of the cookies mentioned referring to leading the cookies to freedom? I don't know. We're moving on. Gingerbrave was told to look around and gather supplies, which is basically game talk for get the stuff you need to get through the game. Afterwards, Prophet Cookie asks him to find Alchemist Cookie and convince her to let them use her science fair project to escape the castle. He says that the only way to escape is through the front door, so they need her giant Franken Cookie to bust the doors down and escape. Gingerbrave arrives at the lab and catches Alchemist Cookie mid-experiment and asks her to help, though she only really agrees because it means waking up Franken Cookie in the process, which is her main goal. She tells Gingerbrave that to wake him up, they're gonna need a revival potion. Alchemist Cookie states she's in the process of making it, but it needs a few more ingredients to be fully complete. There's no room for mistakes here, so she says that they'll need to recheck the formula in order to know what they need. The book containing said information is in the study, although once they find the book, Alchemist Cookie says that they can't open it because the dang thing is locked for some reason. So after finding the key, they unlock the book and discover that Alchemist Cookie is basically so smart that she memorized the entire formula and, as it turns out, didn't need the refresher at all. The last ingredients they need to finish the potion are apparently in the incubation chamber because I guess the witch had other hobbies besides baking. Alchemist Cookie says there's a tunnel that'll act as a shortcut and will take them straight to it. And after freeing the blue wisp to act as a light source, they head in. On the way there, they're intercepted by the cat, who will be a reoccurring kinda nuisance until the end of this story section. However, they make it through and finally end up in the incubation chamber. It's here that Alchemist Cookie gives Gingerbrave the shopping list of final ingredients. Here's what they need: a crimson mandrake, rejuvenation elixir, and a lizard's tail. Alchemist Cookie dips because the game wants Gingerbrave, aka the player, to do this on their own. Ingredient gathering goes pretty smoothly, and once he's done, Gingerbrave returns to Alchemist Cookie in the auditorium, where Franken Cookie is. While she's in the middle of making the potion, a group of minions come out of nowhere, of course, so Gingerbrave fends them off long enough for Alchemist Cookie to finish making the potion. But guess what? We're still not done! Alchemist Cookie says they need to line up these moonlight reflectors to channel moonlight focus for whatever reason, and then they can give the potion to Franken Cookie. Once Franken Cookie is finally awake, they hitch a ride on the top of his head and Gingerbrave takes control of him by using his hair strands. They're just about to bust the auditorium doors down when the Darkest Lord Cookie pops out from the door and just completely obliterates Franken Cookie. On the bright side, it turns out Zombie Cookie was trapped inside Franken Cookie's heart this whole time, although they get punted across the room because, don't forget, we still have the Darkest Lord Cookie to worry about. Gingerbrave tells Alchemist Cookie to take Zombie Cookie and get the hell out of there while he buys them some time. You know, classic main character hero stuff. Obviously, she was not about to abandon him because there's no way this kid could solo a Dark Lord. Wizard Cookie then comes in absolute clutch to blow everything up and guide the gang safely back to Gnome Square. But with Franken Cookie destroyed, that means there needs to be a slight change of plans in terms of escaping. The group bounces ideas around for a bit before Avocado Cookie comes up in conversation. Prophet Cookie says that with her help, they may be able to obtain a strong enough weapon to do something with. While the gang stays back to decipher the meaning of this mural Papa Cookie just has, Ginger Brave is sent off to ask Avocado Cookie to make that super strong weapon I mentioned earlier. Papa Cookie also says that she's been making weapons for the Darkest Lord Cookie and his minions, so naturally, we're gonna try to convince her not to do that. Ginger Brave arrives in the metalworks where Avocado Cookie is stationed and meets her as well as Muscle Cookie. Ginger Brave asks her for a weapon to defeat the Darkest Lord Cookie with, but Avocado Cookie just goes silent and Muscle Cookie steps in to basically just call him puny. But Avocado Cookie sees potential in GB, so she agrees to help him, after a quick test of course. Afterwards, Avocado Cookie says she'll need more materials to make a weapon for him. This time, they need iron ore and some frost stones. Muscle Cookie says Ginger Brave will need some gear before they can go mining, so he guides him to the armory where they can presumably find this stuff. When they arrive, Muscle Cookie tells Ginger Brave to find the mining equipment he needs and then meet him at his climbing tower deeper inside the armory. Even after he finds all the stuff they need to go mining, Muscle Cookie still tells Ginger Brave he needs to pass another test to prove his strength, I guess. It's time to go mining! At the fork in the mines, Muscle Cookie tells Ginger Brave to go left and grab the frost stone while he goes right to grab the iron they need. It's otherwise a peaceful mining journey outside the moldy spores and lava rock monsters trying to kill him. Ginger Brave finds yet another pet to help out, and this one can build paths to help him advance to certain areas. Eventually, GB finds Muscle Cookie trapped under some rocks and is told to go back to Avocado Cookie to, get this, get a bomb to blow up the rocks and free him. If only he had a certain tool we could use to break the rocks. When Ginger Brave actually does come back to blow up the rocks with the bomb Avocado Cookie gave him, Muscle Cookie straight up isn't even there. I don't know how he got out when it was clearly established he couldn't, and that was the whole reason Ginger Brave had to backtrack to get a bomb, but whatever, we're moving on. Eventually, Ginger Brave finds him unconscious, and after waking him up, Muscle Cookie explains he was attacked by a strange monster before running off to try and find it for revenge, I guess. They found out the thing that attacked Muscle Cookie was this lava toad guy, who also knows who Ginger Brave is. In case it wasn't already obvious, the lava toad is working for the Darkest Lord Cookie and was tasked to bring Ginger Brave to him. However, that day is not today, because GB just smacks it a bunch before the lava toad retreats, giving the usual threat of, "This isn't the last time you'll see me." Ginger Brave finds Muscle Cookie again and says that they need to get out of the mines ASAP. So, they take a minecart and burst through one of the metalworks' walls to escape. Fortunately, now they have all the items they need to make that really strong weapon. Unfortunately, as soon as Avocado Cookie finishes the weapon, the lava toad comes back out of nowhere again. At least this one's more of an engaging boss battle than the last one. After defeating the lava toad with the power of teamwork, it retreats into the giant furnace. Avocado Cookie and Muscle Cookie now feel fully betrayed by whatever promise the Darkest Lord Cookie apparently gave them, and are now fully on Ginger Brave's side. With that, they all return to Gnome Square once more. Wizard Cookie says that after deciphering that mural from earlier, they discovered they need something really special to escape the witch's castle, but they don't know what it is or even where it is. This also ties into a point Avocado Cookie made before they left the metalworks. She stated she couldn't guarantee that she could create a weapon strong enough to defeat the Darkest Lord Cookie, but apparently, there's a dragon somewhere in a garden that they could possibly ask for help. Albeit if they present a gift first. However, Ginger Brave is told that the path to the garden is blocked, but the gnomes are working on clearing it. That's basically the game's smooth way of ending off on a cliffhanger. Right before the first chapter ends, there's a small cutscene with a minion updating the Darkest Lord Cookie on what happened with the lava toad. It's basically just another lore lead. And scene. Yippee! Writing this script made me realize that I focus way too much on small details when making a summary. I really had to keep myself in check to make sure I didn't get too overly specific when describing a certain part of the game, because I love sharing small details. This video probably would have been twice as long if I kept all of those smaller details in. So here's a list of all the things I wanted to cover but didn't for the sake of time and sanity. Maybe sometime in the future I'll consider making a follow-up video to talk about all the stuff I didn't share here for the sake of time time. Chapter 1 does end off on a cliffhanger because, as I mentioned earlier, they most likely had plans to further expand the story in the future. I assume Chapter 2 is supposed to come out in the summer of 2024, which was announced once you finished Chapter 1, but the fact it never released was probably enough confirmation to assume the game had been cancelled. The game is definitely more story-based than gameplay-based. Besides the roguelike battle mode I showcased earlier, the main game revolves entirely around its story. If I had to guess why the game was discontinued, and this is pure speculation, I imagine it was due to a lack of interest, funding, and accessibility. Interest, because this game is pretty underground in comparison to the other games in the series, and the exposure it got was nothing compared to the attention towards other Cookie Run media. Funding, because the lack of general interest wouldn't mean much gain, and accessibility, because it being a VR game means you need to own a VR headset in order to actually play it, and those can be very expensive. It's unfortunate because this game had a lot of potential. The visuals are some of my personal favorites from the franchise, and a majority of the interactions with other characters are really fun to experience, but unfortunately, I think the lack of general interest is what ultimately killed it. If you're still here after all this, thank you. I know this is a massive leap in content compared to the things I usually make. I rarely showcase my voice in videos, let alone make an entire project revolving around me talking, so I appreciate you sticking around. Who knows, maybe I'll do this type of thing again sometime. Some final things before signing off. You may have noticed the speed paint I've used as background footage throughout the video outside of the gameplay footage. If you're interested in seeing the full 30-minute speed paint, I've linked the video in the description for your viewing pleasure. I know I joked a lot about how vague the game was with giving lore towards its story, but I can assure you it's not as vague as I made it out to be. It's really just a collection of hints that don't necessarily go anywhere. Between every major section switch, there's a small cutscene where either the Will of the Cookies or the Darkest Lord cookie talks about another thing generally lore related. The Will of the Cookies cutscene mentions gathering more courage and allies, and throughout the game you can find various statues to collect these things called Brave Souls, which are of some importance. The end cutscene of the game reveals the Darkest Lord cookie is obviously also after these Brave Souls due to the fact they hold an ancient power, because why wouldn't they? If you want to know more, just watch the full gameplay walkthrough. My silly video is just a small summary for a much larger story and shouldn't be a replacement for watching the game for yourself. This is honestly just an invitation for you to join me down this rabbit hole I've created. You can thank the existence of this video because of this one my cousin made about an abandoned marker company. You should go watch it. It's very good.